It was the first time I'd been left home alone. At 14 years old, I was thrilled at the thought of having the entire house to myself while my parents took my brother to some event. They had warned me sternly before leaving, "Stay in the house. Don't go anywhere." But after a few hours of boredom, I couldn't resist the temptation and snuck out to see a friend. In my haste, I forgot to lock the door behind me. In my youthful naivety, I didn't realize that an unlocked door was an invitation for danger. It wasn't until hours later, as the sun began to set, that I returned home, ready to act like nothing had happened. But as soon as I stepped inside, a feeling of unease settled over me like a heavy fog. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It was like an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. As I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, I noticed the cabinets were open and items were scattered across the counter. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that things were not as I had left them, but I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself that I must have rushed out in a hurry. However, the unnerving silence continued to make me feel uneasy. Desperately trying to shake off the feeling, I called out into the empty house, my voice sounding small and shaky. "Hello? Anyone here?" Silence greeted me in response. I started to relax, thinking maybe it was all in my head, but then my phone buzzed in my hand with an unknown caller ID. My heart skipped a beat as I answered, hoping it was just a friend or a prank call for some excitement while alone. But there was no greeting, just heavy, slow breathing on the other end. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to sound brave. But there was no response, only the sound of breathing until the call abruptly ended. 2 minutes later, another unknown ID call came through, and my hands were trembling as I answered. Once again, just breathing on the other end. And then a voice, deep and barely audible, said 4 words that sent shivers down my spine.
"I'm in the house."
My entire body froze as fear coursed through my veins. My mind raced with thoughts. Was it a prank? Or was there really someone in my house? Before I could even process what was happening, I heard creaking footsteps upstairs. They were getting closer and closer to where I stood frozen in the kitchen. Without hesitation, I sprinted out of the back door and into the woods behind our house, adrenaline fueling my movements. I didn't dare look back as I hid behind a tree and frantically dialed 911, struggling to catch my breath while whispering to the dispatcher what had happened. When the cops arrived, they searched the house and found the front door wide open. Every room was empty, but evidence of an intruder was clear. Cabinets ransacked, drawers pulled open, and footprints on the carpet. The perpetrator was never caught, and I never found out who had been on the other end of those chilling phone calls. But from that night on, I made sure every door and window was locked tight before going to bed because I will never forget the bone-chilling sound of that voice whispering from somewhere inside my own home.
Even now, the memory of that night from my childhood sends shivers down my spine. I think I was around 12 years old at the time. It was the mid-90s, when it was normal for kids to be left home alone without much concern. My parents had gone out for the evening, promising to be back soon, and I had gone to bed without a care in the world. But then, just as I was drifting off, the phone rang sharply and loudly, jolting me awake. At first, I assumed it was my parents checking in on me. So, I groggily made my way over to the phone, still feeling startled from being awoken so suddenly. But as soon as I answered, a low and disturbing voice came through the receiver, a voice that I didn't recognize at first. The words that were spoken were vile and aggressive, things that no child should ever have to hear over the phone from a stranger. My stomach turned with disgust as I realized that this wasn't a joke from one of my friends or a mistaken call. I didn't know who it was on the other end of the line, but their intentions were clear and sickening. I hung up the phone and stood there shaking with fear. That unsettling feeling you get when something terrible has happened washed over me. As I made my way back to bed, every creak in the house seemed louder and more ominous in the stillness of the night. And then, just as I tried to calm myself down, there was a loud knock at my bedroom window, a single firm knock that sent my heart racing with terror. Slowly, I turned towards the window, afraid of what might be waiting on the other side. The moonlight barely illuminated my room through the blinds, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw him standing outside. Billy, the annoying kid from the neighborhood who was always pestering me. But he wasn't laughing or playing a prank this time. He was just staring at me with an expressionless face. His eyes locked onto mine through the glass. I was frozen in place, unable to move or even breathe under his intense gaze. He raised his hand and knocked again, almost as if he had been waiting there for ages. And then, with a knowing smile on his face, he slowly opened his mouth, a creepy grin that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled backwards and ran to the door, frantically turning on every light in the house, hoping to scare him away. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I even say? That the boy who constantly teased me was lurking outside my window after someone else had made disturbing phone calls? I felt completely trapped and alone, every noise in the house now amplified by my heightened fear. This happened about 11 years ago, back when I was a high school senior. To this day, it's the single most mind-bending experience of my life, and I've never been able to explain it. It was December in Iowa, the kind of winter where the cold feels like it seeps into your bones and the silence is thick with snow. If you got stuck outside at night, you'd freeze, no question. Everything was dead quiet that night, a suffocating sort of stillness where even the smallest sound felt amplified. My best friend, Colton, and I were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, trying to make the most of a boring winter night by sneaking a bottle of wine. My mom was out with her coworkers for drinks, so we figured we had the place to ourselves and could mess around a bit. Just as we popped the bottle open, I heard the garage door open upstairs, followed by a loud slam. My heart nearly stopped. I scrambled, looking for a place to hide the bottle. "I thought you said your mom wasn't coming home tonight," Colton whispered. "She wasn't supposed to," I replied, frowning. Then I heard heavy footsteps, followed by my mom's voice calling, "Anyone home?" "Yeah. Just hanging out in the basement," I yelled back, frantically shoving the wine bottle behind the couch. A few seconds later, her voice called again. "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I was still busy hiding our contraband and shouted, "Give me a minute." But then there was this pause. Just silence, hanging in the air, thick and wrong. And then she asked, "Is anyone down there with you?" This time, her voice sounded off. Like it was my mom's voice, but something essential was missing from it. Something I couldn't quite place. Our family never cared if friends were over, so the question was weird on its own. But the way she asked it made my skin crawl. "Just Colton," I shouted, trying to sound casual. I finished hiding the bottle, then reluctantly headed up the stairs. Each step felt heavy, like something was pulling me back down. When I got to the top of the stairs, I looked around, but everything was pitch black. No lights on in the kitchen, no garage lights spilling in, not even a glint of moonlight through the windows. Just shadows stretching out in every direction. My heart started pounding. I called out, "Mom, where are you?" But all I got back was silence. That heavy, unnatural silence, like the whole house was holding its breath. I felt a strange, electric sensation prickling along my skin. Something telling me I needed to get out. Fast. My mom was not home. I ran back down to the basement, grabbing my coat as I went. "We need to go. Now," I said to Colton, my voice barely steady. "What are you talking about?" "You were just talking to her," he said, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. But the look in my eyes must have convinced him because he didn't argue. As I grabbed my keys, I glanced over to see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat huddled behind it, growling softly. My blood ran cold. Whatever was in the house wasn't just in my head. "Are we leaving?" Colton asked. clearly freaked out now. "No, I can't leave them here alone," I muttered, motioning to the pets. "Let me call my mom. Maybe she's playing some kind of messed up joke." I dialed her number, and she picked up immediately. "Hey, what's going on?" she asked, sounding totally normal, totally. "Mom, were you just home?" I asked, hoping she'd say yes and laugh it off. But she sounded concerned. "No, I'm leaving the bar now." "Are you okay? What do you mean? I was just home?" I quickly explained what had happened, and she was home within minutes. Colton and I waited in the basement with the animals, every nerve in my body on high alert. As we sat there, we heard something, not footsteps exactly, but a shifting, like the air itself was moving, pressing in on us. It wasn't making any noise, but we could feel it like something was there, just beyond the door, slithering through the house. I could only describe it as a presence, one that felt when my mom finally got home. It was like the darkness exhaled, pulling back, retreating. The weight in the air lifted, leaving only the silent, snowy night behind. We never did figure out what it was. My mom brushed it off, but she looked pale. And she made us promise to tell her if anything weird happened again. Years later, after I moved to Arizona, I'd still talk to Colton about that night whenever I came back to visit. Every time, he'd get this haunted look in his eyes. We never figured out what it was, but I'm certain of one thing: whatever it was in my house that night, it wore my mom's voice like a mask, and it was waiting, lurking, and starving for something.